Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. Okay, we have lots of news to start with today. Some good, some not so good, and some absolutely terrible. And we're starting there. What is taking place right now in the country of India is almost beyond words. It's a complete humanitarian crisis as hospitals are collapsing under the pressure of a COVID explosion. If you look at the numbers, I looked this morning and thought there must be a mistake. It looks like they are almost literally off the charts. And in fact, these numbers I'm going to show you are probably underreported due to the poor infrastructure in much of India that is leading to people just dying in the streets. That's not a figure of speech, and potentially not even being counted in the number of dead from COVID. So cases in India have surged to a pandemic high of 320,000 cases per day. India previously had just one peak in mid-September. They did a good job for a long time. This new peak is more than 3 times worse their previous peak. And the deaths are just as bad, spiking most recently to about 2,000 deaths per day. And again, probably under reports of the real numbers because of the disconnected and rural nature of much of India, where we just don't even know if these numbers are actually the full story. Now, I think it's important to understand as we sit in the United States and look at this, that because of India's high population, India has 1.3, almost 1.4 billion people. We have about 330 million here in the US. We still have higher per capita case rates and per capita death rates than India from the start of the pandemic. The difference, of course, is that we never saw rates of growth like this. If this continues for even 2 more weeks, we could have a dramatically different story. And the level of hospital collapse that India is experiencing is different than what happened in the United States. We did get to full ICUs, and we had a very brief period where we were getting to the limit on ventilators. But what's happening with medical facilities and supplies in India is tragically almost unbelievable. They are out of ICU beds in many places. They are out of oxygen in many parts of the country. I saw one report last night where they were reporting from the main sort of meter for the hospital's oxygen supply. It was just at 0. People being left outside of hospitals, waiting for care. Some are just dying in the streets. The images are absolutely horrifying. New Delhi in particular, which doesn't produce its own oxygen and is dependent on getting help from other areas. To call it critical shape doesn't even really explain what it is that's going on there. A bunch of Delhi hospitals tweeted essentially SOS messages over the weekend saying we need oxygen supplies. At least 20 critically ill people died on Saturday after oxygen supply was delayed. They ran out and it took a period of time before they were able to get more. Other countries are trying to help, but it feels like it started too late. Not to be critical of people that are helping, but we saw this coming. And we fortunately now see Joe Biden sending ventilators and PPE and test kits and more medications. Many other countries are doing the same. The UK is sending ventilators. Many countries are doing things, but arguably too late to help many of the people that are dying daily at this point in time. And yes, there's also some vaccination happening there relatively slowly. Some countries are sending more vaccines. We know from looking at the numbers here in the US, it takes a while for the vaccines to make a difference. You start vaccinating. After 2 weeks, that first dose provides 85 or 80% protection. Then you need excuse me, that second dose. And that is a slow process before it makes an impact. Vaccination won't solve the current problem happening in hospitals as we speak, with 3 people dying every 2 minutes. Also going in very much the wrong direction in terms of larger countries are, to some degree, not like India, but the Netherlands, Germany, and Colombia are also seeing some modest upticks in terms of larger countries. And by the way, my birth country of Argentina, just a continued disaster there with a completely incompetent leadership, lack of transparency, strict but unenforced rules, vaccine cronyism. One elected official found with vaccines in his trunk and said, "Oh, I was bringing them to some hospital." I mean, just about everything you can imagine, it's been happening in Argentina. I have friends who just flew down vaccinated, said that accurate mask wearing was at about 50%. Shop owners are all wearing masks from what you read, but you walk in and the mask is down over the throat. Like, it's a complete and total disaster. And the numbers there are also reflecting that. So globally, you actually need some nuance to see what's going on. You have some large countries like India that are disproportionately making the global numbers look bad. We see a resumed case decline in the United States. We are now about 3 weeks from when Israel saw cases go down 90+%. It looks like we are going to start seeing very good numbers. Last week, I said we were 4 weeks away. Now it looks like we are 3 weeks away. And then at the same time, if you look at just the global picture, you say, are we really making any progress here? We are, but we're also losing ground in certain places. And it's going to be, listen, this will go into 2022 when you consider that many countries won't even really be able to start vaccinating in a serious way until then. Never mind the issue of vaccinating children. We hopefully are getting closer to that. Submitted for approval on one vaccine. Pfizer has submitted for approval on 12 to 15. They did that at the beginning of April. We should be days from the FDA reviewing that, and hopefully we can expand that to 12 plus. So many different things to be looking at, some good, some not so good, and what's going on in India, absolutely terrible, which makes this next story particularly difficult to parse. The European Union will be opening to vaccinated American travelers at some point this summer. Let's talk about that next. The New York Times is now reporting out of Brussels, the center of the head of the European Union, American tourists who have been fully vaccinated against the coronavirus will be able to visit the EU over the summer. We don't know when that will start, but this is based on the head of the EU in an interview with the New York Times yesterday. It's been more than a year since non-essential travel from most countries has been shut down to Europe. And the EU is saying that because the United States is vaccinating so quickly, and because talks have been advancing about how can we accept vaccination certificates as proof of immunity, the EU and the EU Commission believe that at some point during the summer, now summer is technically, it starts June 21st, they will be able to switch policy to one that would restore the ability of Americans to go to Europe. Ursula von der Leyen, president of the EU, says, quote, "The Americans, as far as I can see, use European Medicines Agency's approved vaccines. This will enable free movement and travel to the European Union because one thing is clear. All 27 member states will accept unconditionally all those who are vaccinated with vaccines approved by the EMA." Adding that the vaccines being used here, Moderna, Pfizer, and J&J are approved and considered valid in the European Union. No current timeline, but this is sort of a top level statement that guidance will be coming soon. And it is looking like we will be at 70% of adults being vaccinated sometime in the month of June. It will all be subject to the epidemiological situation, but that it is improving in the US, and we are starting to see an improvement slightly in the European Union. Now, there are already some European countries where you can go. You can go vaccinated to Estonia. You can go vaccinated to Iceland. You can go to Croatia. There are some other Eastern European countries where you can go, but it's relatively complicated. I have friends that have done it vaccinated, and this seems to be a much broader discussion. The guess is that this will include some kind of reciprocity as well, where presuming that the numbers improve in Europe, the United States will begin to do the same. Now, very important, we are also anticipating new mask guidance tomorrow from Joe Biden via the CDC regarding outdoor masking. Now, Dr. Fauci has been teasing this for some time. A number of different doctors, including Dr. Ashish Jha or Jha and others, have been saying the language they've been using has been relatively restrained, including that it may not be a high point of contagion outdoors. From what we believe, before there was any vaccination, Dr. Ashish says about 1 out of 1,000 cases were being transmitted outdoors. And you have to believe that that 1 out of 1,000 was not someone jogging by someone else. It was people doing things outdoors that are obviously things you shouldn't be doing in the middle of a pandemic before there are any vaccines. But the point is that Dr. Ashish has been making that psychologically, if we can all say, hey, you know what? Outside, if you're not in a big crowd of people, just normal outside, walking by others on the sidewalk, biking by someone, whatever, people aren't getting sick that way. And particularly now, as we approach 30% vaccinated, we can ease up on the outdoor masking. That is the expectation for what the CDC will tell Joe Biden, and Joe Biden will announce tomorrow. Now, it's unclear whether Joe Biden will say, only as it applies to vaccinated people, then you start getting into this two-tiered thing of saying, if you're vaccinated, take your mask off outside. If you're not, don't. I think that there are some potential social issues with doing that. But needless to say, I think that there will be a big psychological benefit and possibly more encouragement for people to get vaccines if indeed the announcement tomorrow is outdoor masking is not required, other than in really specific situations. A mass of people at a concert, which there shouldn't be concerts going on anyway, a mass of people maybe entering a stadium where in the stadium with reduced capacity, people are spread out, but you might be funneled through metal detectors, for example, and crowded together, even though it's outside. Okay, wear masks then. But your typical, bike path, whatever. Now, to be clear, I've been doing it all along. I go out on my bike, I go out running, I put a mask on. I do it because I'm a team player. I don't want to be the guy being glared at. And also there's some degree to which, if you're told to wear a mask outside and you don't, people assume you're probably also not wearing one inside or whatever. So I've been wearing it. But if indeed, when we get that announcement, not really if, it's more a question of when, I am not going to be wearing a mask outside once the CDC says it is not necessary. It is believed that that will be tomorrow. And my hope is that will be another boost to people wanting vaccines. The CDC already saying vaccinated people can travel without significant notable risk, material risk. That was a great thing. That made more people say, oh, okay, that's a change. I will go and get vaccinated. And hopefully an update to mask policy tomorrow will do the same. So some signs that are good signs. Some states now are down in terms of daily deaths to close to what you see from flu. Massachusetts is an example of recently about 10 COVID deaths a day. During the average flu season, Massachusetts sees 4 flu deaths a day. So we are getting down to, by virtue of vaccination, a situation where it is going to be a flu-like situation. And that changes circumstances dramatically from when 200 people a day were dying, for example, in Massachusetts. So I believe there are good things coming, but we have to keep vaccinating is the message. Let me know your thoughts on all of this. Timeline, your behavior, your vaccination status. You can find me on Twitter at @dpakman. What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist. And what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books. They condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for. If there's a full book you're thinking about buying, you can use Blinkist to get a sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way. and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month, and you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video. The David Pakman Show does depend on the support of viewers and listeners like you. You can grab a membership at joinpakman.com. I promise it's really easy and painless. Check it out. You might remember that back in 2017, Hurricane Maria ravaged Puerto Rico, the island of American citizens that is southeast of Florida. We learned at the time that many Republicans didn't know that Puerto Ricans are American citizens. We also knew at the time that Donald Trump didn't really seem to care very much about it. The administration was slow to send the aid that they did send. And we know that when Donald Trump went, he didn't really seem to be taking it super seriously. Remember when he showed up and tossed paper towels into the crowd like he was shooting hoops? We're playing that video now for our television and online video audience. But now we have to think it wasn't merely indifference to Puerto Rico from the Trump administration in 2017 and 2018, that it was actually much worse because of a new report from the Department of HUD, Housing and Urban Development. The Inspector General of the Department of HUD has issued a report that says that because of tension between Department of HUD and the Office of Management and Budget under Trump, all sorts of bogus procedural hurdles were put in place to delay Puerto Rico actually getting the money. Now, some of you will listen to me say this and you'll go up and you'll look at money approved for Puerto Rico and you will say, hold on a second, David. The money was approved. 20 billion was approved for Puerto Rico, and Trump announced it and talked about it. And of course, yes, the money was approved, but the whole point is approving funds doesn't disperse the funds. They are separately processed. And the Office of Management and Budget, which would approve the distribution of the funds, around that time started to require HUD to send grant notices for disaster funds through an interagency review process for approval, which never before had been required, which dramatically slowed everything down. Investigators found that OMB never required such a review for recovery funds before, and it was a requirement created in this particular situation. Former HUD Secretary Ben Carson would be a perfect guy to ask about all of this. He declined to be interviewed by investigators. Access to HUD information was delayed or denied multiple times throughout the course of the investigation. And the Trump administration's OMB also insisted on completely overhauling Puerto Rico's property management records, suspension of its minimum wage on federal contracts, and a whole other bunch of prerequisites. Imagine saying, we're approving 20 billion for you, but to get it, you have to remove the minimum wage provision on federal contracts. What? And some HUD officials realistically and rightly worried that the requirements were, number one, designed to make it impossible for the money to actually be distributed, and even potentially beyond HUD's ability to actually do. Two top HUD officials admitted knowing that they were on purpose missing the deadline to issue a notice that would unlock billions in federal recovery funds to Puerto Rico. They're not even denying it. Or I mean, they didn't at the time. Ben Carson later defended his agency's actions by saying Trump's talking points, which are, we wanted to prevent corruption and irregularities. That's why we needed to do this stuff. Then Ben Carson refused to actually be interviewed by investigators here. So now that we have a bigger picture, not only did the Trump administration allegedly block the much needed aid from getting to Puerto Rico, they also obstructed an investigation looking into why Puerto Rico didn't ultimately get the money. And there's nothing surprising here whatsoever. Last week or the week before, it's hard to keep track of all the scandals. We were talking about another newly uncovered Trump administration scam. And I said, it's not clear we will ever know the full scope of the grift or the scamming that this administration did. Every time we do learn about something new like this, my reaction is, Of course they did that. If you look at the public disdain that Trump had for Puerto Rico, and you look at the public indifference that Trump exhibited, none of these revelations is remotely surprising or hard to believe. And then, of course, I mean, we can't really come full circle on the implications of this without mentioning that no matter what comes to light, a huge portion of the 75 million people who voted for Donald Trump in 2020 would take him right back for another 4 years. They would gleefully vote him back in if he runs in 2024. And as we will talk about a little bit later on in the program, the vast majority of them still believe that Joe Biden did not legitimately win the 2020 election. But there is no news story. There is no grift or scam or revelation that would change their minds. And that's a major problem for the country. These revelations show the complicit nature, not complicit, the responsibility of the Trump administration in Puerto Rico being a disaster for as long as it was after the hurricane. But as much of a problem as that is, we also have an ongoing problem in that the vast majority of the 75 million people that voted for the guy would vote for him again. And we're going to talk about that poll a little bit later today. Okay, let's talk about infrastructure spending and green energy and other things that Joe Biden wants to do. Joe Biden is actually trying to do some interesting things when it comes to infrastructure and climate, which includes kind of reorienting some industries to be more sustainable over the long term, to create jobs in the area of green rather than dirty energy. And the climate denying right wing is absolutely furious with Joe Biden for wanting to do this, even though he ran on it. He's just doing the things he ran on doing. And they are having a field day over the last few days, focusing on completely bogus claims that Joe Biden's climate and infrastructure plan for America would ban steak and beer. Now, what is really important to understand about this is that lots of the people that are saying this stuff, they stop short of saying Biden has proposed this, but they sometimes will say Biden's proposals would lead to this type of thing, or what Biden actually wants is, but then some of them don't get the message that that's the language you're supposed to use. And they straight up say, this is in Biden's proposals. And of course it's not. So let's go to the beginning and figure out how this all came to be. The banning steak thing, the kernel of the, for lack of a better term, the kernel of the banning steak goes back to 2020, when Donald Trump said that in AOC's GND, in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal, cows are banned. Okay. There was not actually any mention of cows in the Green New Deal framework back then. There was a supporting document later released by AOC staff, which said, we aren't sure we'll be able to fully get rid of farting cows and airplanes. Now, that wasn't suggesting let's try to get rid of cows and airplanes. It was merely stating we're never going to get rid of cows and airplanes, and therefore we should have other ways to work within that reality to deal with the things that impact the environment. Okay, so there was never any banning of cows. That became AOC will ban cows. And if Biden does the Green New Deal, he will also ban cows. Now, Biden doesn't support the Green New Deal. He took some elements from the Green New Deal and integrated it into his green energy proposal. So we're already like 3 layers removed. None of this is true. But this weekend, because the Green New Deal was reintroduced, not by Joe Biden, they are going nuts. And the latest trajectory of this is that the Daily Mail ran a really weird piece connecting Biden's climate plan to some study from Michigan about meat that has nothing to do with Biden, and Republicans ran with it. Trumpian Congresswoman Lauren Boebert tweeted, Joe Biden's climate plan includes cutting 90% of red meat from diets by 2030 and limits us to 4 pounds per year. Fox News ran with it, saying Biden's climate requirements cut 90% of red meat from diet, max 4 pounds per year. Don Jr. retweets it, saying, I'm pretty sure I ate 4 pounds of red meat yesterday. That's going to be a hard no from me. But the University of Michigan study that they are citing has nothing to do with Joe Biden's plan at all. It just looks at what would happen to emissions if people did certain things. And it points out, if people cut red meat consumption by 90%, then emissions would go down. And the Daily Mail took the hypothetical percentage reduction and somehow linked it to Joe Biden's plan. And this is what it leads to. They just don't care. They spent the weekend talking about it. It's completely made up. And then Donald Trump's former economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, he unintentionally cell-phoned himself. He went on Fox Business and said, under Joe Biden, we would have to be drinking plant-based beer on the 4th of July. This is my new favorite thing. Take a look at this.
So get ready. You can throw back a plant-based beer with your grilled Brussels sprouts and wave your American flag. Call it July 4th green.
Now, why is that funny? If you know anything about beer, you would know beer is already plant-based. Plant-based beer, or as I call it, beer. Beer is made from water, malt, hops, and yeast. Water, we know, is not an animal product. Malt is germinated cereal grain. That's a plant. That's a plant. Hops are the flowers of the hop plant Humulus lupulus. That's another plant. Yeasts are eukaryotic single-celled microorganisms classified as fungus. That's almost more of a mushroom than a plant, but it's not meat. But this stuff just gets repeated uncritically. Biden will make us drink plant-based beer as if it's some kind of weird thing, if it were even true, which of course it isn't, because it can't be true because beer is plant-based to begin with. Next thing you know, we'll have plant-based corn. Plant-based eggplant might be on the menu. Plant-based, what's interesting about this is that plant-based is now a fear-inducing buzzword. Even things that are plant-based by their nature, they will stick the word plant-based on it, and it's supposed to give you a certain image, a certain understanding. It's actually sort of like, sometimes you'll see the gluten-free label on like almonds, and you would think to yourself, wait, well, what do you mean gluten-free? It's just an almond. It's not gluten. But it has a certain message because gluten-free has become trendy and people see gluten-free on an almond. They say, here's a great price. It's a marketing thing, even though lots of things are it's just an ingredient. Much the same way that the word socialism is used to describe the government doing anything by right-wingers. Plant-based is now a buzzword among the right with a very particular connotation, and they use it even to describe things that are naturally plant-based. Now, here's a strategy question. Do we ignore or challenge this stuff head on? If you ignore it, it runs the risk of exactly what happened this weekend, that they go crazy with Biden will ban red meat and beer on right-wing media, and then it starts to infect the social media networks, and you start seeing legacy media reporting on it in a way that's not as critical of the insanity as it should be. It starts to spread uncontrolled if you ignore it. At the same time, you address it, and you're spending time on it rather than something else. I actually don't know the answer. I'd be curious to hear from you. Maybe we'll even set up a poll about this on the David Pakman Show Instagram page. You should be following us there. Find us on Instagram at David Pakman Show. You can find me on Instagram at david.pakman, and we'll be back right after this with dystopian new polling data from CBS. The number one funding source for the David Pakman Show has been and continues to be membership. And membership is not just a feel-good thing. You get access to the world-famous bonus show every single day just for members, as well as commercial-free audio and video feeds of the show day in and day out. You can sign up for membership very, very quickly at joinpakman.com. That's joinpakman.com. If the normal prices strike you as high, by all means, use the coupon code BETTER21, all one word, all lowercase. Become a member today. So we have a new CBS News poll asking American voters about a number of different things, which we will look at. But one top line that just cannot be missed is that at this point in time, almost 6 months out from the November 2020 election, 75% of Trump voters still believe Donald Trump's lie that he won the election, not Joe Biden. 75% of Trump voters responded that, no, I do not consider Joe Biden the legitimate winner of the 2020 election. It's almost as bad with Republicans. The idea that there's a big difference between Republicans and Trump voters. 70% of Republicans overall do not believe that Joe Biden is the rightful winner of the 2020 election. If the numbers are anywhere close to this, in reality, it is another humiliating embarrassment for the country and for critical thinking in the United States. Now, what do I mean by if the numbers are close to this in reality? It's a reasonable question to ask whether they actually believe it or they are showing support for their tribe by claiming to believe it, even if they don't, to send a message to the pollsters, to the media, to Democrats, to whomever. It's a very stupid message to send if that's what they're doing. But the problem is that even if they don't actually believe it, but they just say they do on polls, polling data like this can be used to justify or to feign support for all sorts of things, either by protesters or by Republican officials. So it's a problem either way. It's certainly conceivable that there are some people who say they don't believe Joe Biden won, but they kind of do, and they're just saying it for the purposes of messing with pollsters. Another issue. We've covered how more voters than in a long time have abandoned the Republican Party. The percentage of people identifying as Republican has gone down. As a result, does it make it more likely that the Trumpists that stay are the ones most likely to believe any lie that Donald Trump tells, and that this is less a shift in the Republican Party believing this? It's just the people that still identify are more of the Trumpy wing, which is why there's only 5 points of difference between Republicans and Trump supporters in this particular case. That may be. On the other hand, thanks to Trump, there's lots of previous non-voters who joined the Republican Party, so maybe we can't make such an assessment. Other interesting data points from the poll: despite the controversy in Washington, D.C. about infrastructure spending, it's very popular. 87% of the country wants to spend money on improving roads and bridges. Overall, 58% of the country approves of Joe Biden's infrastructure big picture. That plan includes money for roads and bridges, but also building out green infrastructure, hardening and improving the electrical grid, modernizing, building electric car chargers, speeding up transitions to renewable energy, many other great things. That's popular. Even though it's not clear a single Republican will vote for it in the House or Senate, it's popular. Overall, Joe Biden has very high approval on vaccine distribution. 72% of the country approves of the job Biden has done on vaccines. Even nearly half of Republicans say Biden has done well on vaccines. On vaccine hesitancy, the numbers, they improved marginally since last month in this same poll, not by much. The number of people who are saying no to the vaccine is steady at 22, similar to last month, similar to other polls. The number who are maybes went down from 22 to 18, and the number of yes went up from 55 to 60. Not a massive change, just outside the margin of error. Those numbers, once we can vaccinate kids, would get us very close, if not to herd immunity. But it would obviously be far better if we could get the vaccine hesitancy down to 12 or 15%. We have a much better chance if vaccine hesitancy goes down to that degree. So that's the situation. Much of it is disturbing. I mean, it's very disturbing, of course, that 75% of Trump voters, now almost 6 months out from the election, still are saying that Donald Trump won. Most of those people want Trump back and would vote for him again, as recent polling has shown us. You also don't get to numbers like these without big boosts from media. And so we have to go back to Fox News and to Newsmax and to OAN and others for boosting these conspiracies from day one after the election, continuing to boost them until they received lawsuit threats. And even today, they're still hosting guests who say this exact same stuff. The network anchors will sort of stay silent and play more coy with it. But that's a big factor in how people even came to believe this stuff. It's not clear how we fix it. Lots of the people who still think Trump won are the same people who won't wear a mask indoors. And they're the same people who won't get a vaccine because they believe it's some kind of Democratic plot to destroy liberty, even though they also believe Trump invented the vaccine, or they think the vaccine will be used to control their minds or poison them. That's a pretty deep, you could call it a delusion or a misunderstanding of fact. That's deep and significant, and I don't really know how you fix that. And so maybe in that context, it's not super shocking that you still see that level of the Republican Party believing Trump didn't really lose. Joe Biden didn't really win. And what some of you are not going to believe is that they are sort of going at it again with the voter fraud stuff. Yeah, yes, they're doing it. Take a listen to this. Some of you aren't going to believe this. Some of you are. And I don't know which is more troubling, that we would still doubt the absurdity of the Stop the Steal movement, or that any new initiative seems like something they would plausibly do. But let's talk about what is happening. Republicans, and according to Rudy Giuliani, Donald Trump is also interested in this and following it. Republicans in Arizona, who control the state's Senate, are now ordering an audit of the state's mail-in ballots from the November 2020 election. That 2020 election. Yes, of course, the election was now almost a full 6 months ago. And yes, of course, even if somehow 6 months later, Arizona was taken from Joe Biden and given to Donald Trump, Joe Biden still wins. Joe Biden doesn't need the state of Arizona. And yes, of course, the Arizona results have already undergone multiple reviews that found no evidence of fraud, and they've been certified, and Joe Biden has been sworn in. So this would do nothing, but they are still pushing this. And here is Rudy Giuliani appearing on former Trump strategist Steve Bannon's program to explain it. Rudy is very interested in this audit, and Rudy is claiming that Donald Trump is very interested in it as well. Take a look at this.
I know you're pressed for time, and we are here too. I got to ask you one thing before you go. By the way, just historic, right? Is the president has been briefed on this? Is he up to speed on exactly the details?
The president knew about this starting. This has been going on. This action in court's been going on now for about 3 weeks. So he's been up to date and very interested in the whole thing. And even before the decision yesterday, when I saw him, he was he's pretty sure it was going to happen. I mean, they already lost this case 2 weeks ago. So this is a last gasp effort to almost re-argue the case. They lost the case about 10 days ago, and it's taken about 10 days to get everything together. And Boris is absolutely correct. They could have brought this thing any time along the way. Yeah. So they waited until the last moment, and then they went into court. And they're making many of the same arguments they made before.
So there it is, another humiliating Republican attempt to do what even? Since, again, overturning Arizona, which will never happen, but if it did somehow happen 6 months out, it would not overturn the election results. Now, here's a serious question. How long do you think they will be pushing this type of thing? We know how long they'll continue claiming the 2020 election was stolen. The answer is a long time, probably forever. Remember that Donald Trump still hasn't accepted that he lost the popular vote in 2016. He won that election electorally, and he still doesn't accept the popular vote results. These people will never accept the 2020 election results. But the real question is, how long will they continue pushing stuff like this? We're going to audit the mail-in ballots. What? The real questions for me are questions like, how has Rudy Giuliani not been disbarred by now? Why does Steve Bannon continue to have Rudy on to peddle this stuff? Is it that good for traffic, for clicks? Is this entire thing an opportunity for someone to keep trying to make money from monetizing gullible people who think that this garbage might lead to something or go somewhere? Like, is it a money grift in that sense? It's almost remarkable how they always act like this time we've got the mother lode, and every single time it's a dud. Remember when they put all their eggs in the basket of that wacky witness from Michigan, Melissa Carone, who knew nothing about anything, but she was going to blow this thing wide open, and she just made a fool out of herself and Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump. Here's a reminder of that, by the way. At one point, this was the big shot they were taking to overturn the results.
The poll book is completely off. Completely off.
Off by 30,000?
I'd say that poll book is off by over 100,000. That poll book, why don't you look at the registered voters on there? How many registered voters are on there? Do you even know the answer to that?
No, I guess I'm trying to get to the bottom
Zero.
of this here.
Zero. There's zero.
So my question then is, if the
Guess how many? Wait, what about the turnout rate? 120%.
Well, let's let Representative Johnson ask his question, please.
So the poll book number, okay, there's two things that could happen here. Either the poll book number, if ballots were counted multiple times, there's two options. Option number one is that the poll book numbers are not going to match.
They don't.
The actual. Not by thousands and thousands of votes. That's not what we see right now.
You take a look
option
again.
number one.
That one really made an impression on me about the poor judgment that Rudy Giuliani has about what counts as a good witness in these situations. So I don't know. I mean, like, maybe I'll follow up on this Arizona mail-in ballot audit if people want me to, or maybe I won't because it's worthless trash that's not actually going anywhere. What do you think is behind it? Is someone making money from this in some way? I mean, listen, there's always a lawyer making money somewhere on this type of thing when you're making court filings and making motions and filing paperwork. So, yeah, there's probably lawyers making money, but I don't think that would really be the motivation. It seems that either it's being monetized for donations in some way. Somebody thinks that they're going to be pleasing Trump by doing it, and maybe that will lead to something. It's not really clear, but I'd be curious to hear what you think is the driving force behind this. We're going to take a quick break. We will go over some of the new pseudo scandals from the weekend and much more. Glad you're with me on this Monday show. The David Pakman Show is audience-supported media, and you can contribute any amount you want on Patreon, as little as $1 per month. Plus, you can get the daily bonus show, world famous at this point, and the daily commercial-free TV show by making those pledges at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. This is audience-supported media. We depend on the support of our viewers and listeners. Whether you listen to the podcast, watch on YouTube, or watch us on TV, or even listen on the radio, patreon.com/David Pakman Show. So we are getting absolutely no respite whatsoever from the profligate barrage of fake scandals relating to Joe Biden that are emanating from right-wing media. And one thing I've learned in covering politics is that there are always scandals for every president. Sometimes they're real, sometimes they're completely fake and made up for political purposes. No president is perfect, but Joe Biden's first 100 days are actually looking pretty good. First and foremost, developing a top global vaccination campaign after being handed trash by the Trump administration, such that the U.S. has now vaccinated 42% of the population, is likely 1 month from dramatic reductions in cases and deaths, probably more like 3 weeks even. Passing COVID stimulus and getting money to people within a couple of months of getting in with no Republican support, literally 0 Republican votes for that bill. Reestablishing some global relationships with countries that were driven away by the incompetence of the Trump administration. For those who care about the stock market, as many claimed to under Donald Trump, record stock market highs under Joe Biden. And it's been 3 months. Okay, so right-wing media is coming up with fake scandals. I won't list all of the ones we've looked at so far, everything from the relationship between Joe and Jill Biden is fake to, all these different fake scandals. There's just too many. I'm just going to focus on the ones from this weekend alone. We already talked about the fake scandal that Joe Biden would ban meat and beer. So that's one. I won't go over it again since we did that earlier in the show. Here yesterday morning is Fox News anchor and longtime Trump brown-noser Maria Bartiromo announcing that during the recent world leader climate Zoom meeting, Biden didn't have a U.S. flag behind him. That's the scandal. Take a look at this.
By the way, in that shot, I think it's really also interesting to point out that President Biden is the only leader without a flag behind him. Everybody has their flag. We don't have the American flag behind Joe Biden, interestingly.
Whoa, that is really, can Biden even recover from that? I mean, that's really, really serious. Fox News is reporting about the absence of a flag during a virtual meeting as a scandal. They wouldn't report on Trump's historic global failure on COVID while it was going on. But the absence of a flag during this meeting is a scandal for Fox News. Here's another big scandal. Former Republican Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich appeared on Judge Jeanine Pirro's weekend show to tell us there are people that are appalled, Jeanine, appalled, that the Biden administration is, quote, flying the gay flag. at American embassies around the world. Take a look at this.
Every idiotic thing that the Biden administration has done in the first 100 days, you begin to realize whether it's threatening everybody who believes in the Second Amendment, or it's attacking everybody who believes in right to life, or it is attacking people of traditional values who are appalled that this administration would fly the gay flag at American embassies all over the world. I mean, you just go down item by item, and it's almost like they have a checklist.
Biden is disrespecting people with traditional values, which is one of the most impotent coded phrases I can think of. He's offending people with traditional values because the gay flag, as he calls it, is flying at embassies in other countries. People with traditional values are going around paying attention to the flags being flown at American embassies in other countries. That alone would be a shock. And if that's really what they're concerned about, they must really not have much going on in their lives. But that's another fake Fox News scandal concocted this weekend. The next scandal is less about Biden specifically, but it's Democrats' bigger picture. Republican Congressman Mike Turner was also on Maria Bartiromo's show yesterday, and he floated a completely unhinged conspiracy theory that Democrats want to block the U.S. from making a nuclear first strike in order to prevent generals from defending us against adversaries, so that if an adversary attacks the U.S., we would just get destroyed as a country. Take a listen to what Mike Turner said to Maria Bartiromo.
And then you've got Democrats led by Elizabeth Warren reintroducing a bill to block the U.S. from using nuclear weapons first. What's the logic?
Well, there really isn't any that's for our security. The Biden administration is proposing 16% increases everywhere else but in defense. Elizabeth Warren obviously wants to, tie the hands of our generals so that they cannot defend against our adversaries. We need to make certain that America stays strong, that we build a strong military, that we rise to the occasion against the modernization of China and Russia. And with that, we'll be able to keep our allies in the United States safe.
Understand that what Mike Turner is alleging is that there are Democrats in the Senate that are treasonous and they would allow the U.S. to just be destroyed. He's saying Democrats, including Elizabeth Warren, if the U.S. were attacked, they would say, do nothing. Here, take me, take all of us, kill us, take over the country. And that's crazy. But also, if it were true, you would imagine that there would be way more people saying, oh, these are traitors. And there are people saying it, but there would be much more of that. And Mike Turner is completely unhinged in his claim. And by the way, I thought that we didn't have anything to defend ourselves with. Remember, Donald Trump used to tell the stories about when I took office, the generals came to me and they said, sir, we have no bullets. We have nothing. So now we have things thanks to Trump. But Elizabeth Warren, if you can imagine that, doesn't want anybody to be allowed to use the things, and the country should just be allowed to be destroyed. And then here are just a few little tidbits about the steak and beer thing. Again, earlier in the show, we spoke about the fake story that Biden wants to ban steak and beer, like eliminate them from people's diets by force. Listen to Judge Janine talk about that.
Finally tonight, do you like red meat?
And then this continued.
So the cows must go.
And she went with this for some more time. Here's a little bit more.
Yeah, I like burgers and I like my gas-powered car, and I'm sick of China having the upper hand over us.
Okay, so that one has actually infected more serious discussions about infrastructure and Biden's climate and energy plan. So we dealt with it separately earlier in the show, and you can go back to that segment if you want to see more about that. But in the meantime, if these are the scandals, maybe Joe Biden is actually doing okay because these scandals are completely fake. And I think we can say thankfully in the sense that it's good when polling reflects what's going on in the real world. Joe Biden's approval rating is quite healthy. Joe Biden's approval on COVID vaccination is doing very well. His approval on COVID relief is doing well. I think that these are all good signs for Joe Biden. Speaking of good signs, a very bad situation for an Alaska state senator is that Alaska Airlines has banned her from flying on Alaska Airlines. I'm talking here about State Senator Laura Reinbold. Tim Thompson, spokesman for Alaska Airlines, told the Anchorage Daily News over the weekend, quote, "We have notified Senator Laura Reinbold that she is not permitted to fly with us for her continued refusal to comply with employee instruction regarding the current mask policy." Apparently, she has not only been refusing to wear a mask, she was even recorded arguing at Juneau International Airport, arguing with an Alaska Airlines staff member about mask policy. And the video appears to show airline staff telling her the mask must be on. It must cover your mouth. It must also cover your nose. Like the basics. We're going back to March 2020 on masking. And she had been apparently asking about a mask exemption with uptight employees at the counter. She said, "I was reasonable with all Alaska Airlines employees," and that she did ultimately board the flight, but she's been vocally opposed to any COVID-19 mitigation measures. She has objected to the Alaska Airlines mask policy that was enacted before the federal government enacted a mask policy. Alaska Airlines had already been saying, even before Biden came in, you have to wear a mask. She's been calling Alaska Airlines staff mask bullies. And when she was asked by flight attendants when boarding the flight to put the mask on, I guess she went nuts and then has sent some kind of apology to the staff. It's all completely crazy. And this is the only airline she can take to go from between Anchorage and Juneau, unless she starts flying private, or like, could she connect somewhere in the mainland? Imagine having to fly from Juneau to like Seattle and then Seattle to Anchorage because she's banned. Actually, even that flight, I think, is only in Alaska Airlines. I don't know what the hell she's going to do, quite frankly, because if you're an Alaska state senator needing to regularly get back and forth to Anchorage, there aren't really other options other than Alaska Airlines. And, you know, I know a lot of people in the audience have dealt with the mask stuff when flying, but you don't necessarily expect it from a sitting state senator. Even on my flight, I talked about this I flew a different, not Alaska Airlines, which as far as I know, Alaska Airlines is being really good on the mask stuff. Not every airline is. I flew a different airline to Aruba last month, fully vaccinated, of course, and with a mask and everything. And there was absolutely no enforcement of masking. There were a lot of people sitting near me who were playing sort of coy with the food and drink policy, where even though the airline announced multiple times, if you are actively eating or drinking, you can take your mask off. If you are between sips or bites, put the mask on. And there were a bunch of people on the plane who were doing the thing where they take the mask off and they hold their drink up so they appear to be in the process of actively drinking. And then they just watch a 2-hour movie on the TV screen and just hold the drink. There was no enforcement whatsoever. At one point, I saw a woman get up from her seat and go to the bathroom, walk by flight attendants with just no mask, and then walk back to her seat. And I'd say half of the people near me, the mask wasn't even covering the nose. And, you know, as I said, I wouldn't have traveled if I weren't vaccinated. So I wasn't bothered in that I was, you know, hiding, thinking I'm going to get sick. You needed a negative test. Everybody on the plane needed a negative test in order to board. And I was vaccinated. It wasn't because of that. But if the rules are right now to fly, you wear the mask, I'm going to play the game. If I don't want to wear the mask on the plane, I'll just say I'm not going to travel for the time being. Because I wanted to travel, I wore the mask, whatever I think about my personal level of risk. That, I think, is what's frustrating, which is, you know, the rules when you get on. You're told when you book the flight. You're told when you check in for the flight. You're not even allowed near the gate without a mask. You're told via announcements. And then for Laura Reinbold to just continue arguing about this, you don't have to fly. Now, you might say, well, she does have to fly. She has to get back and forth from Anchorage to Juneau because she's a state senator. Well, okay, she could look at driving. She could look at chartering a plane. She doesn't have to fly on Alaska Airlines, nor does she have a right to fly on Alaska Airlines. And she is now banned from Alaska Airlines. No word on how she will commute for her work as an Alaska state senator. It's not going to be that much longer, guys. If you're supposed to wear the mask, just wear the mask. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. This voicemail dives into a very controversial issue of IQ, education, and financial success. Let's listen to how the caller frames it up. Take a listen to this.
Hey, David, please perform an analysis and explain this anomaly. If more education correlates with higher income level and more education correlates with voter intelligence, why did 54% of the voters earning more than $100K vote for Trump? Okay, explain this and I will forever address you as sir, and I will forgive you for referring to the University of Pennsylvania as UPenn. All right, take care, my friend.
Oh, my God. I didn't know you weren't supposed to say UPenn. No, listen, so there's a couple things going on. The link between IQ and income is only correlated in a certain part of the band. And what I mean by that is if you have a really low IQ to the point at which it would identify a cognitive issue, that has a very negative impact on earning potential. But what you see is that once you get, I'm trying to remember, this is Nassim Taleb has written about this. Once you get just a little bit above average IQ, you don't see much of an earnings premium as IQ goes up higher and higher. And so I think that maybe the premises here aren't quite right. And in particular, if you set the bar at $100,000, there are tons of people without college degrees who earn $100,000. There are lots of trades in which you can earn $100,000. So I think that, I'm glad to address the issue of income and voting tendencies. And you have to remember that the one reason that people with higher incomes, regardless of education level and regardless of intelligence, might lean Republican, and this is a historical reality, is because as someone with a higher income, they may see that Republicans will make them pay less in taxes. And so I think that you're sort of on to something interesting and exploring, but some of the premises there are not quite right. On the bonus show today, we will talk about Caitlyn Jenner's run for California governor, running as a Republican. What will the trans community think of a Republican trans candidate? What will California Republicans think of a trans candidate? A lot of interesting dynamics there. We will also talk about Joe Biden recognizing the Armenian genocide as a genocide, which Armenians liked and the Turkish folks did not. And there is a lot of controversy around this. We will also talk about Joe Biden wanting to make community college free, but progressives aren't satisfied with that. What more might progressives be able to get from Joe Biden on that? Where are we on debt cancellation? A lot to talk about with Joe Biden and education. Those stories and more on today's bonus show. To get instant access to the bonus show, it's very simple. You go to joinpakman.com and you sign up. That's it. And I will see you on the bonus show in mere moments. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman.